Great, so today we are going to make almond thumbprint cookies. Things that you'll need: a blank piece of counter space, a cookbook opened up to the correct page, a cookie sheet, some butter to grease the cookie sheet, which will be different from any of the butter that we're going to actually use, some flour, cornstarch, baking soda, salt, which my salt is in a sugar bowl, unsalted butter, some vegetable oil, light corn syrup, sugar, an egg, vanilla, lemon zest, almond extract, and some chopped up pecans that I'm not going to use. Jam, I'm using two different kinds. I'm using apricot preserves and raspberry preserves. A mixing bowl for the dry ingredients, a mixing bowl for the wet ingredients, a whisk, measuring spoons, measuring cups, and that's everything you're going to need. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to preheat the oven to 375 degrees. The next thing you're going to do is mix the dry ingredients. You're going to take your bowl and then take your whisk, and you're going to use 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour. Next, you're going to take 1/3 cup of cornstarch, and you're going to stick that in the bowl. Next, you're going to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. Next thing you're going to add is 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, and mix it all up together in the bowl. Big bowl. Just keep mixing. If you're anything like me, you're going to make a lot of mess, so be sure to clean as you go, else you are left with, lots and lots of flour everywhere, which would suck. Whisk, 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 whisk. Mix, mix, mix. Next, you're going to take your bowl for your wet ingredients. Going to take 3 1/2 tablespoons of butter. Next, I'm going to take 3 tablespoons of vegetable oil, and I looked on the back, it says it's soybean oil. I don't know how well that's going to work. The recipe actually calls for corn or canola oil, but I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. You take 1 tablespoon of the light corn syrup and add it to the oil and butter. Corn syrup, as my organic chemistry teacher in high school would say. It occurs to me that corn syrup is pretty viscous. Doesn't like to come out of the spoon. Now we're going to add 1/2 cup of sugar. Next, you're going to crack your egg into the mixture. It has now occurred to me that I need to grate lemon zest off the lemon.
Why are you videotaping yourself?
What?
So why are you videotaping yourself?
It's for a project. After you have successfully grated the lemon zest, you take 1/4 of a teaspoon and you add it to the wet ingredients. So here the recipe calls for 2.5 teaspoons of vanilla. Me, thinking environmentally, I am like, I don't want to dirty 2 measuring spoons. Well, I have a measuring spoon that measures 3/4, and as you know, 3/4 plus 3/4 is 1.5. So 4 times 3/4 must be 2.5. So I'm gonna add too much vanilla to these cookies right now. Watch as I can't do math. This is why I'm a journalism major. I really can't do math. I can't do math to save my life. Next, you have to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of almond extract. At this point, you may be asking yourself why my wet bowl has a handle on it. And that is for this reason right here. So, next thing you're going to do is take all of your wet ingredients and mix them. It says beat them on medium speed. I happen to have the kind of electric mixer that has a special bowl that you put onto it. It's not like an egg beater where you carry it around and plug it in. So that's why my bowl has a handle. The next thing you're going to do is take your dry ingredients that you mixed up all those frames ago, and you're going to add them into the mix, slowly, little by little. The recipe says stir flour mixture into the egg mixture until just combined. Now, one thing I do know about baking, and I don't know a whole lot, but one thing I do know is it is important to scrape the bowl pretty much constantly. If you don't scrape the bowl, you don't mix everything, things get uneven and gross, and you don't like it. It also has occurred to me that you can't see the beater actually beat anything, so you're just watching a bowl for a minute. I apologize for that. My camera doesn't have a tripod, as you all know, so I tried to approximate as best as I could. I also could only, do this in one take. The next thing you're going to do is take your cookie sheet that we put out and the butter that's meant for greasing, a paper towel. I like to use a paper towel and butter. You might use Pam, you might use some other kind of oil. I don't really know how else you would grease a pan. I've always used butter. I take a paper towel and some butter, and then I just sort of wipe the pan with the butter. The recipe also says that you should lightly grease your fingers. What that means for me is I stuck my fingers in some butter and wiped it all over my hands. The recipe says, with lightly greased hands, pull off pieces of the dough and roll between your palms into 3/4 inch balls. Do not make them larger, as the cookies should be small and will puff and spread a bit during baking. After you laid out all of your nice little balls, you need to make indents in them in order to put jam in them. The recipe says that you can use either your thumb or your knuckle. I experimented with both, found that my knuckle worked best. Otherwise I had to adjust the edges of the cookie, otherwise it wouldn't be a full circle. It was sort of flat and gross, and I was afraid the jelly would sort of melt out of it, so I used my knuckle instead to make a nice indent that left the cookie intact. Now I'm using two different kinds of jam here. I'm using apricot preserves, which I use just because we have them in my fridge and we haven't used them in a while, it looks like, and raspberry jam preserves with seeds. It also calls for seedless jam. I'm a rebel and I like seeds in my jam. I'm using a half teaspoon as a gauge, but that turned out to be quite a bit too much actually for most of the cookies, so a scant half teaspoon, I would say. And, you can always adjust as needed. My cookies are of varying sizes and shapes. You're going to want to bake your cookies for about 6 to 9 minutes. While you wait for your cookies to bake, one thing that you can do is the dishes and clean up, because nobody likes a dirty kitchen. And my mother will probably yell at me later if I don't clean the kitchen, so I figure I'll do it now before I forget and say, no, I'm too tired from having baked these cookies and get too involved in the making of this video. So that's what I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to wash the dishes. Lightning speed. Then, when your timer goes off and you hear this sound, that's when you're going to want to take out your cookies. After you take out your cookies, you should let them sit on the pan for a little bit just so that they firm up a little, but you don't want to leave them on the pan to cool, otherwise they'll stick to the pan. So while they're still pretty hot and while the pan's still pretty hot, you want to transfer all of your cookies to a cooling rack. The rack you see there is actually from my toaster oven, but it works just fine. It's a rack. After you've taken them out and they've all cooled down, the next thing you can do is arrange them prettily on a plate to music. In case you're paying really close attention while I was stacking those cookies, you'll notice that there's one cookie left. Excellent. Have it with some tea. Hope you had fun watching this video. It was hopefully as informative as it was delicious. And I hope now you are better equipped to make jam-filled cookies. Turns out the vanilla didn't affect it too much. They were still pretty good, especially with the tea. Hope you enjoyed. Bye! So while I was editing the video today, I was looking at the recipe book and I was looking at the recipe, and it said that I was supposed to have added 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder, which I very clearly didn't. I took a video of myself, you know, making these cookies, and I very clearly did not add any baking powder. I didn't even include it in the original ingredients list. If it makes y'all feel any better, the cookies came out just fine. They're, you know, tender and chewy and jammy, and I enjoyed them. But I apologize if this has caused you any trouble. So remember to watch the whole video so you get to this point. I guess if you haven't watched it, you won't know, but hopefully you have.